Well, hey y'all. Welcome. So glad to be here with you. How was your week last week? It's Monday, it's 4 o'clock, and that means we're here talking about ways we can practice feeling good even when life doesn't. So, how is your week going? So, feel free to post in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube, and we can reply as soon as we can. Want to hear about you, want to hear what you're going through. What are the ways that we can bring content that's helpful and beneficial to you to help you feel good? And remember, feel good is not about feeling happy all the time because life just has a way of showing up. But what we can do is learn how to try on new ways of being in order for us to realize that our emotions are our own, that we are 100% responsible for what we're feeling. And when we begin to learn that and practice that, and also practice the accepting of what actually is, rather than what we had hoped it would be, or if we're thinking about the past, what we wished it could have been, or the future, having it, wanting it to be a certain way. And then when it doesn't happen that way, we're down, we're depressed, we're sad. And oftentimes, anxiety, which is my ride along friend in my vehicle of life, fear and insecurity and anxiety, they all get to ride along with me. Absolutely, because they're part of me. I've spent too many years trying to just kind of duct tape them away and stay in the back. Well, come on. I realized that those parts of me served me for a long time, helped me survive in some of the harder years of my life, but now maybe they're not serving me anymore. So they get to ride along. They're a part of me. Because sometimes anxiety helps me kind of be more disciplined about situations that I might be a little bit more lazy about. Or fear can actually make me aware of, all right, that's a concern. Maybe I need to be aware that I need to watch out for that, or share concern with a family member about it. But those are parts of me that I will no longer betray or tell myself that I'm not enough. Because frankly, I don't know about y'all, but every time I'm on Instagram, there's this foreboding sense of, I clearly am not on the level of some of these Instagram people. And when I hear myself talk like that, I'm like, wait a second. No, I am. I'm okay. You know, we all bring different things to the table. Diversity, inclusion. That's what I'm about. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here showing up for your emotional health and your spiritual health. So today we're going to talk about relationships. Um, Relationships are part of who we are. They're part of being a human. We can believe we would be fine on an island, you know, like Tom Hanks with his volleyball that became his friend, because humans are designed to be in connection with one another. We are designed to be in relationship. But boy, relationships can be like a seesaw, right? When they're good, they're great. Makes me think of that cereal, Tony the Tiger, Frosted Flakes, right? They're great, but when they're bad, right? So let's talk about relationships. What gives? You know, what gives and when a relationship starts, a romantic relationship starts and everything's super fabulous and then something shifts and maybe there's this feeling of frustration or insecurity or um, unworthiness or controlling behavior or jealousy. All these things start kind of popping up like balls in a pool, right? And trying to push them all down, but they just keep popping up. What does that mean? Does that mean the relationship's bad and shouldn't happen? Probably not. But what those balls popping up in relationships do are draw our attention to what could be causing that. And what are the ways that we can learn to show up in our relationships in authentic, honest ways that help build the bridges that we need when things are stressful and difficult, when life shows up, things get challenging. You get married and you have children. Don't I know what that's like? When you're raising kids and being a parent is stressful enough. Add into it any relationship issues with your partner or your spouse, or even friends. Boy, your stress level can just through the roof. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right in. If you have questions along the way, please post in the chat, and I'll get to that later. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for clicking the little bell and the notifications. You can do the same thing on Facebook. That way you can keep up to date with all my content. Okay, so let's go take a look at our content today. Let's talk relationships. So we have patterned ways of being in relationship, and you may not be aware of it. A lot of us aren't. I certainly wasn't. About 20 years ago, I ended up in a therapist's office, and I was there to fix my then spouse. Honest, always right. You know me. Um, and I was there to fix him. He was the problem. I was simply just trying to do my best and make sure he got the care he needed. And to my surprise, my therapist then, her name was Shelley, invited me gently in her gentle way to come back by myself so we could talk about me. And I remember leaving that going, there's something wrong with me? I don't think there's anything wrong with me. And subsequently, over the next 4 or 5 years that I spent with her as a therapist, I've been through about 5 different therapists over my therapy journey, my recovery journey. She introduced me to codependency and the hallmarks of codependency being control, people pleasing behavior, changing who we are to be in relationship or to save a relationship or to keep a relationship, acting as if everything's fine when everything's not. So we have patterned ways of being in relationship. So those dynamics what show up in my life all the time when I'm in a relationship. It's a learned behavior, and that's just how we are. So if you had previous relationships, it's always helpful to kind of look at them, observe them from a curious standpoint to understand kind of your pattern. Everybody's unique. Everybody has their own way. There's no right or wrong way. It's just a patterned way of being. And I point that out and I start there because I think it's so easy to go to a place of blame, right? That the other person is the issue in a relationship. And I think it happens, and sometimes it's completely valid. But a lot of the time I've learned I've really just got to take a long look at myself and my patterns in order to better understand how I may be impacting or creating situations or even drawing certain personality types to me by my behavior. So when we're in a relationship, we have a pattern, and most of those patterns are learned from our earliest years. So humans are wired for connection. Like I was joking, Tom Hanks with his volleyball out on the island. Humans don't do well alone. Okay. We were designed to be in connection to one another, to experience belonging, to experience connection. And connection is one of the most powerful things that we experience as humans. Also, equally, is disconnection. Disconnection is where we feel pain and hurt and wounds, right? We experience some sort of yuck, ouch, challenge. So I want to introduce you to a term, neuroception. Now, some of this content should look familiar if you've been watching me for a while. I've kind of gone back into the files and pulled out this relationship presentation I did probably over a year ago. But it's really good content, and I wanted to bring it to you kind of in a fresh way. So neuroception. So neuroception is awesome. So neuroception is essentially our body being one giant antenna. Okay, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But I want to read this quote from you from Deb Dana regarding how we experience our states of being. And our states of being are when we say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I am frustrated. That I am is kind of you saying, it's your state of being. Where are you today? Okay. So here's the quote. We live a story. Now, think about the story that's in your head of who you think you are, your roles, your functions. We live a story that originates in our autonomic state. In other words, it's just automatically happening. It is sent through autonomic pathways. So the story is sent automatically on these pathways from the body to the brain and is then translated by the brain into the beliefs that guide our daily living. The mind narrates what the nervous system knows. Story follows state. So, in other words, state of being, I'm happy. If I believe the story that I'm happy, then my body will begin to feel happy. It will send a message to my brain. My brain will then narrate a story of why I'm happy. Oh, because she's with her friends, or she's with her husband, or she's watching golf, or I like golf, or she's, playing a game, or taking a walk outside, or exercising. There's something that is helping me to feel good, and my brain is telling the story. It's like, yes, we believe that exercise, walking, spending time with friends is this guide to my daily life. And the mind starts telling that story, and the nervous system's like, yeah, totally agree, right? Story follows state. So, our state of being, our body, is always telling a story and it's communicating to our brain. Our brain narrates it into what we understand as thoughts or belief systems, right? But story always follows the state. Now, this is really important with what we're going to talk about next. So, our bodies are like antennas, scanning our environments. Our body is always asking one question: am I safe? So, there's terms we're going to talk about today that you're going to see throughout the slides: safe and not safe. And the reason why I use those words is that is how our body experiences things like that, okay? So it experiences something, if something is safe or not safe, our body, our nervous system begins to send messages to the brain that something is amiss, something is not okay, okay? So our body's always asking, but this is like an antenna. So it's always, okay? So there's no it's automatic. Our body is just always scanning our environment to determine if we are safe. Our earliest relationships are of how we experienced connection and disconnection really define how we understand if something is safe or not safe. Our earliest relationships affected how we experienced connection and disconnection. So I want you to visualize connection. Connection, not so much like this, but just connection. So like maybe two hands together, right? But disconnection is when we are like this. So it's split, right? So the reason why I don't do this is codependency, okay? So when we are too enmeshed in relationship and connection, then we no longer see ourselves as individuals, we see ourselves as a unit. Now, most people would say that's a really good thing. We use that language all the time in love and marriage. Certainly, there are times when we are as one, but really, we're just two individuals that have chosen to be together. So this can create problems, whereas this means we're together, we're choosing to be together, but no one is grabbing on to the other, you see. Now, disconnection means there's a gap, and we all know the difference between connection and disconnection because we feel it, because disconnection is probably not safe. Connection feels safe. However, your version of connection and mine may be different. We grew up in different households. So we naturally desired connection with our closest people growing up, right? That was natural. That's what children do. When we were young, we were open books. Vulnerability was normal, okay? Like vulnerability was not a worry. It was a very natural part of being a child. Children are naturally curious, wondrous, vulnerable, open books, right? It's as we become adults that that changes, and words like vulnerability feel a little ouchy. But we naturally desired connection. The thing is the people we needed or wanted to feel that connection with weren't available in the way we needed and wanted. And thus we experienced disconnection. We made a bid for connection. The person wasn't there in the way we needed or wanted as children with our very first caretakers, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Whatever that bid for connection was, it wasn't accepted. It wasn't available at the time. No judgment for the parents, right, who were unavailable. They could have been busy doing a million other things that parents do. But in that moment, there was that first initial wound. And that initial wound is common with everyone. We all experience it because humans are fallible. Humans make mistakes. We disappoint each other. We fail each other. We hurt each other's feelings, right? It's part of the human condition. So early childhood, we want connection naturally. We're naturally vulnerable and curious and wondrous creatures, adventurous, playful, free. And then there's a point where we ask for connection or that we want connection a certain way, and the people we're trying to reach out to and connect to are not available to do that. So we learn, and it's a hard lesson, and it's one that often stays with us for a very long time, that our closest relationships can be painful. So this beautiful connection feeling, the warmth, the connection, the belonging, the sense of being heard and valued, accepted, witnessed, seen, that warmth is replaced by pain. And we learn this the hard way, that relationships can be painful, connection can be scary, right? We make the leap that because disconnection was so painful, that maybe connection's not worth it. So a natural need, desire for connection, plus experiencing disconnection equals difficulty regulating emotional health in relationships. Okay? So what that means is, let me just say it again. We learn earliest experiences of asking for a certain connection, that there is a natural need for connection. But when you add in experiencing the disconnection, then that equals a later difficulty in regulating our emotional health in relationships. In other words, we perhaps go into coping mechanisms in order to avoid that disconnection pain. Safe, not safe. So, we carry these early wounds into adulthood and our relationships. Therefore, we see relationships as either safe or unsafe. So it's a either or, it's black or white. There's no middle ground, okay? So let's talk about what is safe. So when we feel safe with people, we generally feel physically at ease. We don't feel tense, we don't feel anxious. I feel open is another way that you would describe it. I feel open or I feel curious. I can access my emotions freely. In other words, I can actually describe how I'm feeling. I can say that I'm happy. Maybe I may not have the words for it, but I feel safe with my emotions. I don't feel threatened by what I'm feeling. Sometimes when we feel unsafe, we actually are scared of what we're feeling. And when we feel safe, social situations are easy breezy and engaging. We are generally very open, very flexible. It's very obvious when we feel safe. What is unsafe? I feel triggered or suddenly feel fearful. Social situations or environments may feel overwhelming or chaotic. I feel tight, nauseous, or anxious. So a lot of body feelings. So remember that quote about the body informs the brain? Our body is picking up on something. But sometimes if we aren't emotionally agile or comfortable dealing with hard or difficult emotions, it can feel scary and we can feel very fearful, overwhelmed, we get nauseous, and we're not really sure how to regulate our body. We also tend to feel disconnected from ourselves. Or in other words, we don't feel very connected within ourselves. We feel isolated or alone, or we feel like we're not enough, or we have self-talk, or we even start talking about ourselves unkindly by saying, well, you're being silly, or you're being stupid, or we say things to ourselves like that. When we feel unsafe, it's very common to turn on ourselves or even go to blame and judgment on others because we're afraid. We feel afraid. Okay. So here's a couple, right? This is just any couple. And there's that bar, right? There's a bar right across the line. I want you to visualize this. There's a line, and there's safe on one side and not safe on the other. And there's an arrow, okay? So there's two people in relationship. There's a term I want to introduce you to called reciprocity, okay? So reciprocity is when we show up to a relationship and there is a reciprocal response from one person to another. Generally, reciprocity is between two people, and it's a mutual connecting, it's a mutual reaching out, asking questions, dialogue. So if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who talks a lot and they don't let you feel like you can say anything because they're talking a lot, then that may not feel very reciprocal, right? You're not feeling like part of the conversation. Like a teacher, when a teacher is teaching a course or lecturing, that's not reciprocal because it's not a back and forth, right? So conversation is reciprocal. So reciprocity is really important in relationships in order for everyone to feel safe, right? So feeling seen and heard are big reciprocal factors that need to be in any relationship. So relationships are a continuous flow of data between our nervous systems. So I want to remind you that our bodies are like antennas and they're constantly checking out the environment for safe. If there is safety, it tells the brain we're safe, we're good. The brain concocts a story, says, hey, I feel so safe because this person makes me feel happy or I enjoy their company. And so I believe that they are safe and I feel good. So remember, story follows state. Our body is informing us when we feel safe or unsafe. So relationships are a constant flow of data between our nervous systems. We're not aware of it, right? We're not like, oh yes, my nervous system is picking up the fact that you're not safe. No, it's all autonomic, right? This is all automatic. But now that we're aware of it, we can learn to approach our relationships with a little bit more intention, understanding that our partner, our spouse, our friend, even our child may be picking up on something that is not safe to them in their nervous system, and they're responding from that place, right? It helps us begin to access empathy and compassion in a different way. So let's say this relationship, they're kind of like, she's maybe like, you're not listening to me. And he's like, well, hey, you never know, right? You read body language. But again, our bodies, we see people, we hear people's tones of voice, and certain factors impact how we may be willing to respond to situations like that if we're tired, stressed, hungry, etc. So reciprocity, it's the feeling of a two-way street. Both people feel like they are equally giving and receiving. So the body language here of our couple is pretty open. She's pretty open. He's kind of reaching out. There's this sense of we're both in this, right? There's sharing of information, not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing, but both feel like they are equally giving and receiving what they need in that relationship. However, the challenge is we humans have bad days and our energies will not always align in that beautiful reciprocal two-way street way. Look at her body language. Arms are crossed. His body language is like fearful, like or defensive. What have I done? Suddenly that reciprocal two-way street, the traffic jam. We're not really sure what to do because she's feeling unsafe, he's feeling unsafe. That reciprocal safe feeling seems to have vanished. What gives? Well, we're human. We have bad days. Our energies won't always align. So what do? Well, here's the practice. So when things are difficult, ouchy, hard in our relationships, remember, when relationships are good, they're great. But when relationships feel ouchy, difficult, challenge, it's bad. And we all know what that feels like. It's in your gut, you're nauseous, you want it to stop, but you have this overwhelm of emotion, usually, that feels very raw, feels very real. And believe me, it is. It's just coming from an earlier experience of disconnection in your childhood, and it's just triggering that memory, that pain that is very much a part of you. So here's where the practice happens in relationships. Remember, connection is safety. Disconnection is where we feel pain. And this image of the woman, she's got her hand on her head. He's like, what did I do now? Maybe defensive. So the goal is one person can show up with a regulating energy that acknowledges the other's needs. Now, this is really challenging, especially when both of you are feeling it at the same time. But when we practice it, just like we would practice fitness or walking or running, it takes practice to learn how to show up in our relationships when we feel ouchy, when it feels difficult, when it feels painful. So one person shows up with a regulating energy and acknowledges the other's needs. It's a positive energy. It's an energy that recognizes, okay, I see you're in a tough place and I know I'm getting defensive. I'm going to recognize I'm defensive and I'm going to say, walk me through what's going on with you. Do you want to talk about it? Do you need some space? Why don't we check back in 5 minutes? I'm here for you. So immediately when you hear words like that, we can feel the warmth in our bodies, right? That is language that is very empathetic. So what this does is it begins to help regulate the relationship when one person shows up in that way. So the key is there is an ebb and flow to all relationships. The positive and minus, in other words, the great moments and the hard moments deepen our connections. It's only in how we show up for one another when it's difficult. And it's a practice, and it takes oftentimes takes working with a relationship therapist and coach like myself, or a therapist, a clinical therapist that can help walk you through that. But the key is understanding that it's a matter of connection. You want to always get back to connection, not agreement. There's a difference between agreement and connection. Agreement, that's just not realistic because we're all going to disagree. We're going to see things differently, but it's the connection that has to stay together, has to stay a priority for a relationship, no matter if it's romantic, friend, parent, child. Connection trumps agreement every time. And that's what deepens our connection. That's what deepens our relationship when we allow connection to trump agreement or connection to trump conflict even. We can learn how to connect. So here's some things that we can do to help understand ourselves when things feel hard. Like that couple, the situation was she was getting frustrated. He reached out with maybe something positive, regulated the relationship enough that she began to feel safe again, seen, valued, heard, felt safer, and they entered into another conversation or dialogue. That takes a lot of practice to do that when we feel defensive or we feel attacked, right? Or we feel like we are emotionally overwhelmed. So, number one, we want to understand ourselves when things feel hard. So, number one, we understand that our coping mechanisms, the things that we did or do to feel safe, that's what they're called, We understand that our coping mechanisms helped us survive when we needed them, may no longer serve us as adults, and we can investigate if those behaviors, those coping mechanisms, are still serving us by creating opportunities to learn new ways to practice feeling safe. Observing how we can interrupt old patterns when we're triggered, when we feel unsafe. Another tip for that is self-care and self-compassion. We can try to show up for ourselves and practice self-regulation. And we can stay curious as we observe how we react to difficult situations and how the earliest times of our development impact our ability to access feeling good today. So when we go to understand ourselves, really the key is recognizing coping mechanisms are just the things we did to feel safe. We felt unsafe. This is early on in our development. And so we had certain coping mechanisms to help us feel safe. And they served us for a long time, did a great job, did the job they were asked to do. However, as we get older, we mature emotionally, and we can begin to learn how to investigate, is that behavior really serving me anymore? Is it helping me anymore? And we learn that by trying new things, new ways of being, recognizing behavior and trying something different rather than just going to our neutral. So we can observe old patterns and then recognize, maybe I can try something new. Self-care, self-compassion. Changing behavior takes time, and it's a million different little tweaks and adjustments to change behavior. This is not going to be an overnight experience, but simply by reading this and seeing it and by thinking about it, we are actually helping our brain understand our neuroception a little bit differently. We can begin to kind of become much more mentally agile and emotionally agile, and recognizing that we can try we can try new things. We can do new things. So how can we show up for one another when it feels hard in our relationship? We can acknowledge emotions. So we can try to see and feel what the other person is feeling and identify what I feel. In other words, I am responsible for my emotions. You have emotions, I have emotions. They don't have to align, but your emotions are yours and my emotions are mine. Oftentimes we hear folks say, well, I feel so bad for them. They're mad and so I feel mad. That's when we're kind of enmeshed with one another, and there's no distinction or line between understanding that's that person's feelings, my partner's feelings, my kids' feelings, my friend's feelings, and these are my feelings, and they don't have to match. They don't have to be in agreement. When we start doing that, it's codependency generally, and we all have a little bit of codependency. I am a full-on codependent, but we all have levels of codependency, mostly because we care about our people, right? We love our people. We want to be there. We want to be empathetic. But there's a line, there's a big difference between pity and empathy. Empathy is learning how to be with another person in their pain without taking it on, without like feeling their pain 100%, but recognizing that I imagine that feels bad. There's a big difference between feeling sorry for someone and really sitting with someone in their pain. And it's an incredibly triggering at times and very, very uncomfortable, especially if you're uncomfortable with pain. And that's always a really good lesson to say, hey, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with this situation. What is that saying about my ability to handle difficult situations? It's a question I ask myself on the daily. We can investigate these emotions. In other words, we ask questions about it. What emotions do I notice in myself and others? What emotions are mine and what emotions are theirs? You're just investigating it. You're recognizing it. Express emotions. I am able to access and share my emotions without acting them out. I can stay calm when expressing anger or frustration. So we can learn how to regulate our emotional response, our reactions, that I can feel angry without yelling. without throwing things around or without slamming cabinet doors. Now, look, it happens. We all lose our temper. It's part of being a human being. That's just life. But we can learn in our relationships how to regulate that more. So we are always, again, creating a safe place for our relationships to be in. And sometimes slamming cabinets or even throwing a pillow, maybe even out of a gesture of like being silly, can feel kind of unsafe to another person. So it's important to think about that and just recognize, I can express my emotion. I can say I'm angry, but I don't need to be verbally loud or physical in order to express that. Like I can regulate it. I can regulate myself and my behavior. And this is a big one. Recognize what triggers me. I know what behaviors may activate my perception of feeling unsafe, and I can self regulate. Safety equals connection. What feels unsafe is usually a fear of disconnection. This is deeply connected to our experiences as children, 100%. And you can learn to see your behaviors and know what's going to activate it and respond accordingly and self regulate. Practicing empathy. So, empathy is huge. I can listen without judging or assuming I know what's best. If these feelings arise, I can remind myself that they may point to my own fear or lack or insecurity or something about me. But empathy is just learning to be with our loved ones, recognize where they're coming from, assume that we don't know what's best for them. Oftentimes we just think we know the best thing is if they would do X, Y, and Z, when we really don't know that, and we don't know what's best for another human being. I know what's best for me, but it's very difficult for me to tell you what's best for you because only you know that, right? Nurture a safe emotional climate. Co-create. In other words, talk about conversations. Um, Co-create opportunities for listening and sharing equally, offering genuine gestures of care and verbal affirmations, appreciations to nourish and nurture connection. We want to nurture connection. And then last, play together, be silly, and laugh. Staying lighthearted and enjoying times of laughter and silliness, this is the easiest way to build pathways of connection. Safe, remember, safe. We are born in relationship, we are wounded in relationship, and we can be healed in relationship. We can be healed in relationship with intention and awareness. Intention and awareness equals healing. So let's take a look at the writing prompts. So again, the writing prompts are really intended to help walk you through investigating what you're experiencing, whether a recent situation created some sort of emotional response in you that triggered you. So let's take a look. A recent hard, difficult, challenging situation in an important relationship was, I added an extra that there. A recent hard, difficult, challenging situation in an important relationship was between me and my daughter. We were seeing things from a different perspective, and I was feeling a really strong urge to fix the situation. The situation felt scary because anytime I feel out of control of a situation, I feel scared. So the situation felt really scary, and I felt nauseous in my body. It reminded me of a time when I was a kid and my parents would go away and listen I'd be at home alone and it would be dark, and I remember feeling very scared, and that feeling of fear really reminded me of that time. The feelings that come up with that are anxiety, worry, unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. I feel uncertain. I want to control the outcome. What I think I needed was someone to walk me through hard emotions. I needed someone to just be able to sit with me and have empathy for my fear and say that it's normal to feel afraid, but that we can still um, sit with our feelings of fear and not avoid it or repress it. But I didn't get it, so I just overcompensated. In other words, I would go to a coping mechanism where I would just kind of disassociate from my fear and just go to a happy place where I was in control of everything all the time. And it was wonderful in my head. I lived as if, as long as I could control it, it was great. Um, I didn't care for uncertain situations. I just generally wanted to control everything. Um, and so that was my coping mechanism, is just either ignoring it completely or over managing it. Very hyper vigilant, anxiety, big time. It makes sense that I behaved this way because I didn't know what else to do. Like I had no one to show me how to be afraid without trying to manage everything. Um, and so uncertainty felt scary. So it totally makes sense that I behaved as if I needed to either avoid it or just manage it, like hyper vigilant, manage everything to the nth degree to stay safe, right? Remember, I wanted to feel safe. Today, this behavior may no longer serve me because hypervigilance actually annoys the people I love, right? When I have controlling behavior, it hurts the people I love. No one likes to be controlled or managed as if they're objects, right? So in order for me to feel safe, I would control everything. Well, that just really started to hurt the people I love. And so then I can kind of tended to disassociate more, where I just didn't want to deal with uncomfortable situations and I would avoid it. And so that has been my biggest work probably over the past 3 or 4 years, is really learning how to just be present with uncomfortable emotions. So being present with uncomfortable emotions is how I learned to be a human being, because life is always going to change. And so these behaviors just don't serve me anymore, and I needed to find another way to be. Understanding this, I may need to spend more time with my therapist, sitting with difficult emotions, learning how to self regulate when I feel scared or overwhelmed. I need to try on new things, new practices. So, one way I can offer myself compassion through this is recognizing this is hard work, and hard work takes energy. And so, self care and self compassion, and being able to allow myself space to, rest, to recover, to, talk through things in a safe way, to show up for myself are big ways that I can recognize this is hard work. And so if you're doing this work, it's hard work, it takes energy. So self-care is critical. And self-care doesn't just mean bubble baths and wine in the bathtub. It's self-care is a whole other area that you can learn to do things that serve your soul well and help lift your spirit, encourage you, give you the rest you need. If I try this, I may find it benefits my relationships by I'm not ignoring somebody else's pain or discomfort because it feels scary. And I'm also not managing the crap out of it. Like I'm not hypervigilant, wanting to fix it, rescue, resolve, make everything okay. Okay, so those are my writing prompts, and this podcast will be dropped on Wednesday, probably around 9:30 a.m. I am so glad you were here to listen, and I hope this content has been beneficial. You can reach me at all of the places on Instagram, Real Life by Heather, Facebook at Writing Real Life, and letsfeelgoodnow.com. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day, and I will see y'all next week. Bye.